Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sounds of Science, a series of podcasts hosted by EUCOPE, a European trade body representing small and mid-sized companies active in health technologies. My name is Stefano Romanelli, and I am Senior Government Affairs Manager at EUCOPE. Today, we are diving into an urgent topic, antimicrobial resistance, or IMR. Recognized as the silent killer, IMR poses a significant threat to public health and EU citizens. We'll explore key recommendations from EUCOPE and the pharmaceutical industry on how to incentivize development of and access to innovative antimicrobials and antibiotics. We will also discuss what steps are needed to create a sustainable market for antimicrobials in the EU. Before moving forward, we'd like to kindly ask you to click on the subscribe button for our podcast and follow us on LinkedIn to stay up to date on all of the latest news and initiatives within the world of European life sciences. Joining us for this episode, two industry leaders actively working in this space, Joe Taylor from Shionogi and Emanuele Degortes from Menarini. Hello, Joe and Emanuele. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Stefano. Nice to see you.
Hello, great to be here.
And both Joe and Emanuele and the companies they work for bring a wealth of experience in developing innovative therapies and addressing market challenges related to IMR. So let's jump right into the discussion and let's start with the basics. IMR has been labeled as a silent killer or silent pandemic, yet public awareness remains low compared to other health threats. Why is IMR such a critical issue for the pharmaceutical industry and global public health? And I will ask Joe to begin first.
Thanks, Stefano. That's a really important question. So, why is AMR such a critical issue? Well, antibiotics are known as the building blocks of modern medicine. Essentially, without them, almost all medical procedures would become extremely risky, if not impossible. And they impact everything from hip replacements to routine dental procedures, cesarean sections, and chemotherapy. And right now, we're running out of effective antimicrobials faster than we're developing new ones. And many pharmaceutical companies have already left this really important R&D space. The pipeline for effective antibiotics is dwindling. According to the WHO globally, there are only 28 antibiotics in development that are targeting superbugs on the WHO's priority pathogen list. That might sound like a lot, but if you look at oncology, for instance, it's between 2,500 and 3,000 candidates in active clinical development. So you can see it's not anywhere near enough. And we need sustainable investment in this area if we are to stay ahead of the resistant superbugs. Now, there are scientific and regulatory challenges to the development of antimicrobials, but fundamentally, the economic model for developing new antibiotics isn't working. R&D for new drugs, we know, takes 10 to 15 years. It costs millions of euros, and it's a very complex process with new antibiotics facing a 95% development failure rate. So we need to do things differently to shore up the pipeline for the future, and that includes new innovative finance models such as incentivizing R&D, because the economics just don't add up. So we need to work together, whether it's industry, clinicians, governments, policymakers, regulators, and non-profits, all of us, to come together to collectively find solutions for what is essentially an urgent global health crisis. At Shionogi, we're playing our part. We're advancing the science and building on innovative partnerships and working with governments to agree financial solutions to help fix this broken market. I'll end with saying, since Sir Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, and he did it near our office in Paddington in London nearly 100 years ago, we've had effective antibiotics. Our job is to make sure we have them for the next 100 years.
Thank you, Joe. That's a clear outline of some of the current challenges with IMR. Emanuele, do you want to add something and add more insights on this topic and these issues?
Absolutely. I think that Joe has summarized the issue just so brilliantly. I just wanted to bring perhaps another couple of numbers to underline the severity of AMR and the potential consequences. As Joe said, this is a real challenge in terms of the impact it can have now, but it's also a real challenge in terms of the impact it can have in the future if we don't fix that broken model. At the moment, AMR, if we look at the European Economic Area, is currently causing 35,000 deaths annually. But if you look at if we start looking towards the future and at the OECD, according to them, unless we have some multi-sectoral interventions, by 2035, some of the countries with high epidemiology of resistant infections could see the resistance level of certain infections reach 90%. So the situation becomes really, really tricky. And this situation is caused and exacerbated in particular by the 6 main resistant pathogens, which are responsible for around 80% of death directly attributable to the AMR. And this actually requires focused attention on those areas, which actually could result in the biggest value to patients and to healthcare systems. But as Joe mentioned, these are areas that are incredibly hard to tackle from a scientific perspective. The last thing I wanted to mention in addition, which also Joe alluded to, is the trickle-down effect of the impact of AMR. Of course, antimicrobial resistance, we're talking about infections, but I wanted to highlight the impact that it can have on, in particular, immunocompromised patients. So take transplant patients or oncology patients. Cancer patients are 3 times more likely to die from a fatal infection compared to patients without cancer. And infections are believed to play a primary or associated roles in approximately 50% of cancer patient deaths. This means that the cost of AMR is actually significantly higher than the cost of targeted antibiotic treatment because of all the costs related to a lot of these underlying conditions. So you may be investing with the latest oncology treatment for our patients, and then they risk a 50% risk of dying because of, in inverted commas, a simple infection.
Thank you, Emanuele. I think we have really set the stage quite broadly and explained why IMR matters and why we need to act and give and identify the right incentives to develop new antimicrobials, antibiotics, and work to tackle IMR. And to this extent, EUCOPE has outlined some recommendations on what is needed. And among others, we stress the importance first of a consistent approach to design IMR products, be it antibiotics, antimicrobials, and others. The need for fit-for-purpose push and pull incentives at EU level, and then that such incentives should be also complemented by national pool incentives, and also at national level, the importance of improving convergences between different national requirements, both at regulatory and HTA levels. Could you elaborate how these recommendations align with the challenges and the need that your companies face, and what else is really needed to try to create the right environment for the developments of these critical products that we really need? And I will start with Emanuele this time.
Thank you, Stefano. I work at Menarini, and Menarini is among the last few European companies that remain committed to bringing novel antibiotics to European patients. However, the environment is becoming increasingly hard, and it is actually putting at risk any company's future endeavor in this space, which is something that is very sad. I think we've been committed to the space also thanks to the fact that we are a family-owned company, and the ownership of the company has remained very committed to the space. But this is something where questions start to arise about the sustainability of our model in the future. When we talk about the broken antibiotics market and the elements that could help to fix it, I think the EUCOPE's recommendations just highlights them very well, and highlights in particular the fact that some elements of the solution will need to be achieved at a central EU level, while others need to take place at member state level. And any EU action has to be complemented by action at national level because that's where the access models are developed. And here we're dealing with a double problem of, on the one hand, a lack of R&D. Just said only 28 products are currently in the pipeline with a very high failure rate. But at the same time, we also have a situation where a lot of the products that have been developed, may have received marketing authorizations, are still not reaching patients because of the poor access conditions. So both of these elements, the R&D on one side and the access on the other, need to be addressed at the same time.
Thanks, Emanuele. I think it's good to hear this alignment also from a company perspective. And I would also ask Joe to share her views and the views from a company like Shionogi on this topic.
Well, Emanuele has very eloquently set out the main issues. I only have a couple of comments to add to that. I mean, I was struck by what Emanuele said, actually, and how sad it was that Menarini are one of the last remaining European companies in this space. And it really does bring it home, how desperate the situation is. And I guess, when you look at what antimicrobials are used for and how they're used, it kind of underlines what the problem is for me, which is they're mostly used for acute treatment. And at the same time, we must do everything we can to limit the development of resistance. So new antibiotics are often reserved for a very last resort against the most dangerous bacteria, and we're encouraged to use them sparingly. They're not sold in large volumes. That doesn't make for a very attractive commercial market for anyone thinking of coming into the space and investing large sums of money in R&D. So as Emanuele says, we need market incentives to ensure that companies do come into the space. Where in pharmaceutical marketing do you hear companies encouraging more competition? But we really do need new antibiotics to sustain the pipeline and make sure we've got antibiotics for the future. We do have an opportunity. We are optimistic that there will be something in the forthcoming pharmaceutical legislation, and we need to do everything we can to support that happening and also support the implementation of incentives at the national member state level as well. And that will be different depending on the country. So incentives are really, really essential.
Thank you, Joe. And I think this shows that we all agree that we really need a stronger EU level coordination, but also national measures, especially for what concern incentives. And building further on what you both hinted, what concrete steps or what concrete incentives should policymakers prioritize to create an environment that is supportive of innovation in the antimicrobial sphere? And Joe, I will continue with you.
Thanks, Stefano. Well, we need to build those market incentives to ensure we get the investment in new antibiotics, and they can be one of two types. We call them push and pull incentives. Push incentives reduce the cost of developing antimicrobials and help bring those products to market, and they can include things like grants, investor funding, or clinical trial support. Pull incentives reward a company that develops a medicine by guaranteeing revenue. And that usually means separating or what we call delinking revenue that companies receive. So it's not dependent on the amount or the volume of antibiotics sold. Currently, push incentives alone won't be enough to drive the development of new antimicrobials beyond the R&D phase. So the introduction of pull incentives or innovative financing mechanisms is essential. An example is the UK subscription model. At Shionogi, we're very proud that we're one of the first companies to have made an agreement that breaks that link between payments received and volume of antibiotics prescribed. In the UK, we signed up to be part of what was then NHS England is now DHSC's antimicrobial products subscription model pilot. And it's often referred to as the Netflix model because it works in the same way. You pay an annual fee. It addresses the economic challenge of tackling AMR because it provides companies with a fixed payment each year so that the health system has access to novel antibiotics as and when they need them, sort of on demand. And that's separated, as I said, from the volume of medicine sold. This means that a fair return on the investment companies are putting into much needed innovation. DHSE are now looking to roll it out more broadly following a successful pilot. And I know that other member states are actually looking at this approach with interest. The last thing I'll say is on the global stage, we have the political declaration coming out of the WHA. We want to see the implementation of that and the independent scientific panel on AMR. Plus, we hope to see a continuation of AMR as a priority for the G7 when Canada hands over the presidency to France later this year. This global focus will help keep AMR the top of everyone's agenda and hopefully help those incentives come through.
Thanks, Joe. That's very exhaustive. And I think you also explained very clearly, but in a simple way, how some of these incentives or some of the needs work. Emanuele, do you want to add anything?
Yes, perhaps I wanted to let's focus on Europe and this intersection between what could the EU do and what could member states do. I think at the moment we have a great opportunity, as Joe mentioned, on the revision of the general pharmaceutical legislation, where we as Menarini strongly believe that the starting point for any incentive at EU and member state level should be a very clear categorizations on which products need to be incentivized. If we take the sort of examples of what has worked very successfully as a boost to R&D efforts, but also market access, the orphan designation model is one that could be applied also in this space in the form of, at the moment within the latest draft, we see the concept of priority antimicrobial, but a way to categorize those products that really need to be prioritized and incentivized through EU and national incentives. Because once we have this categorization, we feel that it's going to really encourage a number of member states, in particular the biggest member states, to develop those tailored access models that can really help not only develop these products, but also bring those products to patients. Joe has alluded to one example, which is the subscription model, which has been pioneered by the UK. There have been other examples, the German example, where they're trying to provide, let's say, premium prices to novel antibiotics by getting rid of the comparator in pricing and reimbursement negotiations. That could be another model. There are other countries that are testing out a revenue guarantee model. In a way, I think that it's important to somehow leave the freedom to each member states to organize a healthcare system as they see fit. But the one thing that is absolutely essential is that there is a political commitment on what should be each country's contribution to their fair share of a global pull incentive. This has been estimated by some of the most cited paper to be around 4.2 billion per novel antibiotic for a 10-year period. I think that should be the starting point to also assess the effectiveness of any type of access incentive or pull incentive that is developed, either by the EU or at country level, because that is a clear benchmark on whether that particular incentive may be successful, may actually make a difference, or actually fall short of any real ambition.
Thanks, Emanuele. I think I can really agree with what you said. And to some extent, I think that it's reassuring to see that we have potentially different kind of incentives that member states can apply also depending on their specificities of the country or what they need, but at the same time could help achieving the goal that we have. And what is more important though is what you said, we need really a political commitment to do so, because without political commitment and the need to understand that each policymaker, each member state, or each country need to do their part, we cannot achieve this goal given the challenges and specificities of these products. And one of the other specificities is that besides the development of new antibiotics or antimicrobials, we also want to ensure access to these products. But the access to this product is very peculiar because it must be balanced with the promotion of responsible access, because we are talking about products that we don't want to use potentially unless it's needed. So how can industry, policymakers, and other stakeholders work together to achieve this balance between incentives for development and access, but also a responsible use of antibiotics or antimicrobial products? And Joe, maybe I will start with you first.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Stefano. Well, AMR is a problem for all countries at all income levels. Bugs have a universal passport, they don't recognize borders, they will travel everywhere. We're also seeing a worrying increase in drug resistant infection, as Emanuele said, caused by geopolitical instability like conflict zones and mass displacement of populations. And this is absolutely certain to impact European health systems. We need to innovate to remove the barriers to access. Although populations in low and middle income countries face a high burden of death from drug resistant bacterial infections, access to newer antibiotics can often be delayed by more than a decade, would you believe, because of legal and regulatory challenges. So, again, we need to work together, all stakeholders, to find solutions to this global crisis. At Shionogi, we're playing our part through a pioneering partnership with the Global Antibiotic R&D Partnership, or GARD-P, and Clinton Health Access Initiative, which is CHI. And we're proud to have led the industry in this partnership with transforming access to antibiotics for LMICs. It's basically a tech transfer agreement allowing GARD-P and CHI to provide access to our antibiotic for the treatment of serious gram-negative bacterial infections, which may be resistant. We recognise that AMR is a global problem, that we can't just tackle it in Europe. Resistance anywhere is resistance everywhere. So we have to tackle it as a global solution.
Thank you, Joe. And Emanuele, how do you see we can tackle this issue? What is your perspective on this?
No, absolutely. I think there are a couple of things that I wanted to mention, and I totally agree with Joe on how this is a global issue. One thing that I would like to mention, however, is that this is a global issue. However, developed countries have a responsibilities to provide the adequate incentives to address the dwindling pipeline so that products can be made available in developing countries and of course the developed countries that are providing those incentives. Because the issue, as we said from the beginning, is of R&D and is of access. And if we look at quite an impressive number, only 2 of the 18 antimicrobials launched since 2010 are currently accessible to clinicians and patients in all 14 high-income countries, which include the US, UK, Sweden, France, and Germany, etc. So only 2 of the 18 antimicrobials launched since 2010. Clearly, this is not only a problem of R&D. And so again, on this point of every country, and in particular every developed country, has a responsibility to do their fair share of making sure they're in a way matching their political commitments to this space, also in terms of the value that they're going to give to the novel products that are coming to market. The other two elements which we need to look at is, again, referencing something that Joe mentioned, these type of delinking models can be really effective to ensure that revenues are indeed not linked to the use of the product. And that can ensure that those products are used in the most appropriate way. Lastly, of course, as all companies active in the space, we all have stewardship programs. And I think this is another very important element to ensure that products are used in the appropriate way to targeting those conditions that actually need them. So these are the 3 elements that I wanted to emphasize. 1, let's make sure the developed country contribute their fair share to any pull incentives that they may develop. Secondly, let's test out some models where there is a delinking between revenue and use of the product. And lastly, I think stewardship program will continue to be essential in this space.
Thank you, Emanuele. That's also very insightful. And I find it great that what you both have been saying really complements well the point that each other is making and gives us a thorough overview of some of the issues, some of the potential solutions, and the actions that could be taken, and they need to do that at all levels. We mentioned the global level, EU and national level, and also the responsibilities that some countries should carry out first of all. Maybe as a final questions and also looking forward to the future, what is your key takeaway that we take from this podcast, and also as the critical actions that we really need to create this sustainable investment for innovation and to fight IMR? Emanuele, I will ask you first the final burning question.
Thank you, Stefano. So, very briefly, three points. We need continued political commitments at all levels: G7, G20, WHO, the UN, the EU, and individual member states. Political commitment is essential to ensure that something is done in this space. Then let's look at the EU, and here one opportunity that we have with the revision of the general pharmaceutical legislation is an agreement of a centralized EU categorization to create coherence on which novel antibiotics should be prioritized. I think this is going to be another essential element for the EU. And finally, moving down to the member state level, we need those effective access pull incentives that can truly reward innovation and then can provide a boost to the R&D efforts and this pipeline that we hope to boost in the coming years.
Thank you, Emanuele. And Joe, same question for you.
Thank you, Stefano. Well, I agree with everything Emanuele said, but I'll add a couple more myself. So I guess the three main takeaways for me are incentives. We must find sustainable economic models to encourage that investment in R&D for AMR that we need. The UK subscription model is a great example. It's not the only one. There will be others. We need to find them and we need to implement them. The way to do that is, second takeaway, legislation. This needs to be taken seriously. It's a very serious problem. Legislation is the tool or the imperative we need to make it happen. We've seen Italy do it. They introduced legislative changes through their budget law to allow reserve antibiotics access to an innovation fund. We have a big opportunity with the upcoming pharma legislation and all of the global vehicles that Emanuele pointed out. And the third one is responsible use. Equitable use is essential to make sure that current treatments stay effective. Partnerships like Shionogi's Guard P Chai one guarantee responsible, equitable access in areas with the highest problem of AMR. This helps keep them safe and keeps them working. And finally, a call to action. I know you didn't ask for one, but I'm going to, if I may, say what we would like. So at Shionogi, we are committed to the fight against the risk of resistant infection through scientific innovation and advocating for policy change. And we're helping to advance the science so that clinicians and political leaders can have effective antibiotics for another 100 years and beyond.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you very much, both. I think this was a very valuable discussion, and I feel relieved in hearing the commitment from your companies and the shared awareness of addressing this issue and what can be done. We have touched on a number of critical points, such as the needed incentives and the needed conditions to make the market attractive for the development of new antimicrobials, but also how we can improve access to these products, and also the need of different actions that EU and member states should take, both but at national level, at EU level, but also at global level. And I want to finish maybe on a positive note and saying that I am really hopeful that this political commitment that you both mentioned several times is there, and that we will see the right actions in the next months and years, because it's really what we need now to improve the situation, and these actions are needed now, soon, to really tackle this issue that cannot wait anymore. And on this note, I will close this podcast. And I want to thank you both again, John and Emanuele, for sharing your expertise and perspective today very clearly and frankly.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
the opportunity. Thank you.
For our listeners, if you want to learn more about EUCOPE's position on IMR, visit our website and stay tuned for more discussions on the evolving European healthcare and pharmaceutical landscape. That's it for this episode of Sounds of Science, the podcast that keeps you acquainted with the most pressing policy files and news in the world of European life sciences. We are EUCOPE, the European trade body for small to medium-sized innovative companies working in the field of health technologies. You can stay up to date with our work by engaging with us on LinkedIn or visiting our website.